Should we worry about overprinting and whether or not it's going to ruin the hobby? Let's talk about this. So there's been some talk about overprinting, particularly with Topps Baseball. I've noticed that I've been able to get Topps Baseball product at Target from time to time. Also particularly Select Football was seemingly overprinted. And in general, with overprinting, people are concerned about, are we gonna enter another junk wax era? And so I wanted to give my thoughts on that, on my experience with that, because I did collect. I started collecting in 1985. And that was probably, I guess, roughly the start of the junk wax era. I know 87 Topps was heavily overprinted, and then obviously 88 and so on and so forth. And so my thoughts on that were, and I kind of believe that as well. Like if we just print to the moon, there's going to be so much supply that really these cards are not going to be worth anything. When we go back and look at 88 Topps, those cards aren't worth anything. 89, they're not worth anything. A couple of things I'll say though is, were those cards ever worth anything? I just thought about it. I mean, 1988 Topps, in my opinion, was one of the worst sets ever. It was a very boring design. I don't remember any iconic or key rookie cards in that set. So I don't know if that set ever would have been worth anything anyway, even if it wasn't overprinted. But that's just one thing that I was thinking about is there weren't as many cards to choose from. There weren't any type of autos or RPAs and most importantly, I believe there wasn't any grading. And so when you look back at those years, the junk wax era, a lot of people who have those cards do not have them in a PSA 10 or a PSA 9 condition. If they're raw right now, they're probably PSA 7 at best, the overwhelming majority, which are basically worthless. But if you happen to have a Don Mattingly 1984 Topps PSA 10, that's a very valuable card. If you even have a card in the junk wax era, obviously the most iconic and notable one is Ken Griffey Jr.'s Upper Deck rookie card, which we know was printed to the moon. I mean, there was a Netflix special on baseball cards and the junk wax era. And one of the things that it talked about were some of the scandals that went on behind the scenes. And particularly with the Ken Griffey Jr., it is rumored that Upper Deck printed this card specifically in addition to the regular print runs of the card. And somehow all these copies got out into the wild. And there are more Ken Griffey Jr.'s than we could possibly imagine. Even with all that, a PSA 10 Ken Griffey Jr. is worth, I believe, $2,500. I haven't checked the price lately, but I believe that's what it's worth. And so my whole point in bringing this up is I do not believe that it was overprinting that killed the hobby. I certainly think that it played a part because once the demand died down, now there was so much supply and everybody who had cards that thought they were worth something suddenly had, cards that weren't worth anything. And of course, then they all got out of the hobby and that's kind of killed the whole market. So there was some element of that. However, I think what it really was the type of stuff that we're starting to see lately. The fake, G.I. Joe cards in a Pokemon case, or fake cards, period, or fake slabs now, or altered cards, or all of these things. This stuff went on during the junk wax era as well, as more and more money entered the hobby. I remember a couple of particular scams. One was the Fleer Tower of Power basketball cards. Apparently, and I don't know, I might have the story, a little bit, not correct, but I'll do my best here to remember the story. This was a long time ago and I didn't go back and research it, but apparently what dealers were doing were they were artificially driving up the price of these cards. They would submit a price to Beckett, and this is how it was done in the old days. They would actually write in what their card was selling for. And so and Beckett would take all that information in the aggregate and come up with a market price. And so they were artificially selling these cards to each other And Beckett would notice these sales and say, oh, looks like the Fleer Tower of Power are going up. So you'd see these up arrows next to it. And they went up a lot. And this was all, it was all a scam. There was nothing really particularly rare or interesting about these cards. It was all made up by a group of people who were just trying to, pump up the price and then obviously unload the cards. And then the day of reckoning happened, and everybody who wanted to sell their cards did, and the price came crashing down and the story came out. The other thing that I got caught with, and I don't know the story behind this, but they came out with O-Pee-Chee baseball cards. Now, O-Pee-Chee Premier Hockey actually had value, and I believe still has value to this day. So O-Pee-Chee Premier came out with baseball cards, and I traded $300 worth of my cards for a box of O-Pee-Chee, unopened O-Pee-Chee Premier baseball cards, because it was the next hottest thing. And that's these boxes were selling for about $150. And so I was excited to get mine. I opened it up. I had whatever stars were in that box. And I swear, not even a year later, the cards were absolutely worthless. I don't know what the story behind this was. I don't know why there was hype and then suddenly the cards were worthless. It'd be interesting to look up. But this was a personal experience that I had where I traded cards that had some value. I mean, $350 of Beckett value, but in reality, at that time, you were starting to get less and less for your Beckett value. But still, I was happy. I was like, oh, cool, I can trade these and get an actual unopened box of cards. And it basically traded it for nothing. So stuff like that definitely left a sour taste in my mouth. And probably one of the reasons that I really didn't want to collect going forward. And I remember even thinking to myself too, like, why did I stop collecting? It really didn't have to do with overprinting. By the time I stopped, there wasn't as much printing. I think I stopped around 97, 98. By then I bought some Bowman baseball, Bowman chrome. Those cards were not really heavily printed, obviously not like 87, 88. But I just think that all of this type of market manipulation really is what left a sour taste in my mouth. The other thing is, on the vintage cards, a lot of trimming, a lot of however they could alter the card to make it more valuable. And then when the stories came out that, hey, this card has been altered, that kind of stuff, I believe, is what really leaves a collector kind of wondering, well, do I even want to be in this hobby? Can I even trust what I'm buying? And I still have an issue with that as far as vintage cards are concerned. Even PSA graded vintage cards, I'm not 100% sure that everything was caught that could be caught. That's just something in the back of my mind. And so that's what I really wanted to talk about. The other thing I noticed too when I came back into the hobby was that the 86 Fleer Jordan was the card to get, not the 84 Star card. When I left, or at least in the 90s, it was the Star card that was the one to get. And my friend, I have a family friend who collected basketball all throughout the 80s. He was a huge basketball fan, probably the only guy that collected basketball. And he bought the 84 and 85 Star sets in the little team bags. And so he had one of the Jordans. And in my mind, I'm like, wow, that is incredible. Whereas the 86 Fleer, everybody had the 86 Fleer. When it got popular in the 90s, people were bringing out binders and binders of that 86 Fleer. So I just didn't see how the Fleer surpassed the Star. And then I read that there are twice, and this is apparently known in the hobby, there are twice as many fakes of that 84 Star as there are real 84 Star cards. That's disturbing. So much so that PSA won't even grade the 84 Star. I mean, that tells it all. I'm not sure how Beckett decided they're okay to grade it. I'm really curious to know, what knowledge do they have that PSA doesn't have, and why wouldn't they share that knowledge with the hobby? Because I think that's something that's going to help us all out, right? I mean, we all as a card collecting community should be educated on how to identify these fakes. That would actually help Beckett out too, because then if we identify the fakes ahead of time, then maybe we don't even send them into Beckett ourselves. Anyway, these are the kinds of things. So I just believe that market manipulation, fake cards, people generally trying to take advantage of one another, those are the things that really left bad taste in collectors' mouths. That's what kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. Obviously, the main reason I stopped collecting is because I graduated from college. I started a job. It was a very demanding job, and I just had other things to do. Life got in the way. And I got back into it a little bit later. I've always loved it. I even with all the manipulations, scandals, fraud, scam, whatever you want to call it, I just enjoy the hobby. I just enjoy collecting. So I don't think any of that was ever going to keep me out permanently. But I do think that it could affect other people. It could definitely play a part in whether or not they decide to stay in the hobby. And I really believe that that was the major reason why a lot of people decided to stop collecting, more so than overprinting. And ultimately, the 1994 baseball strike, I think that was like the nail in the coffin. It was like, okay, I remember at that time, a lot of baseball fans were very bitter about that strike, and a lot of baseball card collectors were just bitter about the sport in general. And so a lot of people were saying, I'm never going to a baseball game again. And probably along with that, I'm never collecting another baseball card again. And so I think that really was just the last nail. And it's like, okay, this is it. It's over. And for, a good, probably 30 years, is that right? Let me see, 04, almost, maybe 25 years, the hobby was seemingly dead, but it really wasn't. But anyway, that's a different story. So I just wanted to share my thoughts on whether or not I think overprinting is what killed the hobby. I don't think that's ultimately what did it. And the reason I'm saying that is because I believe if Fanatics, they've bought Topps, and eventually they're going to take over producing cards for the NFL and NBA. And I believe if they produce what they say they're going to produce and have cards in shops, in grocery stores, in gas stations, or wherever. When I listened to the interview with Josh Luber, he talked about all the different places that were going to have cards. And I think people's concern is, oh no, junk wax, overprinting. These cards aren't going to be worth buying. And I just don't see that as killing the hobby. I think people also will be aware that there are certain brands of cards that are heavily printed, similar to what probably people are aware of Topps 2021 today. They probably understand these base cards are not going to be worth hundreds or thousands of dollars in the future. And so we're just collecting to have fun. We're collecting to open blasters or hobby boxes, maybe get an auto, and just kind of enjoy it for what it is. But I think that in the short run, and hopefully even in the long run, it's going to actually help the hobby because more people are going to have more fun. And I think that's what's going to be kind of the driving force behind the growth of the hobby over the next couple of years. So my 2 cents on, that topic, just wanted to cover it a little bit. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you on the next one.